how's it going, everybody? It is another Sunday night, and that means it's time for another episode of Explain Yourself. My name is Ben Morris. I'm a comic creator and I'm host of the show. Joey Galvez is taking the week off, so I'm flying solo this week. We have two great creators to talk to about some very cool indie books. Bring in Daniel Kalban and Jerry Carnita, who is coming right back in a second. I think he got kicked off. Uh, Daniel, how's it going, man?
Good. I'm exhausted. I just wrapped up Terrificon here in Connecticut, so I'm just chilling in my hotel room, just trying to regain energy after a long weekend of hawking books.
I can certainly understand that. That sounds pretty tiring. Jerry, how you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
All right, thanks. So Jerry's book is Tales from the Cloakroom, or I'm sorry, just Cloakroom 1 and 2. Uh, and tell us a little bit about the book.
So it's an offshoot of Scott Snyder's Substack class, and so Scott does a writing workshop through his through his Substack. It's called Our Best Jacket, and he's been doing it for a number of years. And so I think 3 years ago, a group of the students got together and decided to collect short stories from people in the class who'd been like working on their craft through the class, and they published it in an anthology. It's kind of a copy of one sitting right here somewhere, actually. The first one was called, yeah, I do, I have them both. So the first one was called Tales from the Cloakroom. That was this one, Tales from the Cloakroom. And it's just a collection of, it's like 18 or 19 stories from, people who are in Scott's class. And if you're of a certain tier in the class, you send your pitches and your scripts to Scott, and he actually gives you notes on them, and he's like super interactive. And so that was volume 1. A year later, a completely different group of kids got together and did the same thing, volume 2. And then right around when this was on Kickstarter, that's when I joined the class, and myself and another woman in the class named Veronica Howell, we took over the project. And we rebranded it, we renamed it a little bit, we redesigned it a little bit. So rather than an annual gigantic anthology, which just seemed like a Herculean task to us, we turned it into a sort of a quarterly smaller thing. So every 3 months, we do a new issue. It's called simply The Cloakroom. And it's still the same thing. It's we interact with Scott has a very active Discord with a lot of the students in the class, and so we just connect with other students. They pitch us ideas. Veronica and I act as editors and publishers, so we get to exercise a different part of our creative brain. We're on issue 2. So issue 2 is live now. It'll be it wraps up in 9 days, and we're about $1,000 shy of hitting our goal right now.
Yeah, cool. And so anybody who's watching this on YouTube, the link to these books are right down in the description. And if you're just listening to this, you can go on and Google Cloakroom, and like I said, or like he said, in the next 9 days to support this. So I'm going to bring this on screen. So we have some artwork up there. Very cool cover image.
Thank you.
And he kind of got some of the different breakdowns of the stories shared and what I thought were really I don't think I've seen a lot of people do this on Kickstarter pages, but just to have a quick little image with a blurb about the comic and the sample right next to it. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, the whole thing is like, we're trying to kind of give all these people in the class it functions as kind of like an offshoot of the actual class. So if you work on your craft, if you're taking notes in the class, you're learning something from other students in the class, the guests Scott has on, or Scott himself, you can kind of go and sit and write your own story. We'll help you find an artist if you don't have one to work with. This one, for example, is Anna wrote this great story, and Les Lyndon Gardner is a buddy of mine from another project I work on. So we paired them up for this story, and it's a beautiful, kind of psychological story of a woman kind of visiting the demons that live in her brain in a way, and just kind of getting to know them. So each one we wanted to highlight the creators because that's kind of what it's all about. It's like the whole project exists to give them a spotlight for the first time in their careers, or early in their careers, give them a place to get published.
Yeah, I think that's a huge. I mean, there's a lot that you. When I got into college and started working at an illustration studio, somebody told me you're going to learn more here in like 2 months than you learned in 5 years of school, and that
Right.
was completely true. I think you probably learn a ton by just having to put together a story, whether you're just writing it or writing and drawing, as it looks like Matt Salisbury is doing here. Just getting something done delivered to somebody who's going to publish it, I think is the best education you can get in a lot of ways. There's really no substitute for that. Um, so I had a question. Do you most anthologies I see are kind of like following a theme? I would kind of think because this is sort of just comes out of the workshop that everybody's stories are pretty disparate. Do you kind of try to pick things that fit together, or do you kind of just work with the best stuff and just approach it as like a quarterly anthology that doesn't necessarily have a united kind of backbone theme?
So the first two volumes had a theme. The first two volumes, they specifically played off the name of Scott's Substack. So a lot of the stories had to feature a jacket, a coat of some kind, or a cloakroom, or something coat related. And a lot of some of the stories would just have a character that had a coat they liked, and sometimes it would be like a really main part of the story. But that was sort of their prompt. We decided not to do that. We decided we wanted everyone to kind of have the freedom to just write whatever story they had inside them that they wanted to work on and get out. And we didn't want them to kind of feel like they needed to worry about a specific prompt. So what we do though is the whole unifying principle is sort of the whole community of the Our Best Jacket crowd that Scott has put together. And so we ask each author to kind of tell us some way that something they learned from the class, something they took away from another student, or the whole interaction helped to facilitate them making this story come to life. And so sometimes it'll be as simple as, Scott did a mystery class where he said something like, the best way an easy way to set up a mystery is to just think of a scenario where two characters are up to something and there's a third character trying to figure it out. And that's a very basic sort of setup. One of the stories in this issue, that one, they're a cat and mouse. Dan Brady went home that night after seeing that and hearing that class and wrote this story. It comes directly from something that Scott said in the class. So that's kind of the unifying principle. Each story it's the story, and then there's a quote that comes at the end that kind of ties it back to how someone from a class helped inspire the story, or help it come to life.
Yeah, I think sometimes advice like that or directives like that, usually they seem very simple when you describe them, but it's sort of like, of course I would know that a protagonist seems more likable after they save a cat, but when they break it down in the book, I'm like, okay, yeah, I really see how those gears turn. And that sort of thing helps me out a lot. And when I'm trying to conceptualize stories or just figure out really how to pace them too, I think that kind of framework is so helpful. Yeah. And it's cool to hear that that's kind of, the structure of the class a little bit, and that kind of really informs the stories as well. I have to admit, and I'm a little embarrassed, it was only when you were first giving me the short pitch at the beginning here that I connected the Best Jacket and Cloakroom thing, and I thought, oh man, that's
yeah. Well, that was the original thing. The original title, they went from Tales from the Cloakroom. They tried to tie it back to Scott's Best Jacket, which is funny because Best Jacket is it's nothing to do with coats. It's a combination of his two kids' names. Their names are like Jack and Emmett, I think. And you put them together, Jacket. So when you look up his Substack, it's actually Jacket spelled with two T's at the end.
Oh, cool. I think I'm subscribed to the free version of that comes in every weekend.
Well, then you're welcome to pitch us a story.
No, yeah, one of these I have to get caught up on some stuff, including some stuff for Daniel. So
nice.
Yeah, the drawing takes a while, but yeah, it's a really good. I think that's a cool approach to. One of the things we work in a short kind of magazine anthology, Joey, my co-host, and I, called Archetypes, and we're kind of patterning it after Wizard magazine a little bit. So we have some short stories in there, and we have some how-to stuff. In another anthologies, of course, are united thematically in some way, or sometimes even carry on.
We are doing the other question you asked. I didn't really answer it. We do try to have a variety in each issue. So the first issue had 7 short stories. It amounted to about 62 pages of comics. And then this one has 6 stories, but it ended up being bigger. I think it's almost 70 pages. And we go for variety. So we got pitched a couple of zombie apocalypse stories. Like, they were very different. They were thematically unrelated. Apart from the zombies, they were very different from each other. But we just felt like let's move one to issue 2, and this way we have like a nice variety in each issue. So we'll have like a fairy tale, we'll have like a dark fairy tale, we'll have a little bit of a mystery, we'll have something sci-fi, we'll have something. So far we've done 2 issues, both have zombies. Our next issue will be a holiday. We actually are going to do a theme. So we did a holidays issue, and so we have a couple of Christmas stories, we have a couple of Passover stories. I think we ended up only getting 1 Halloween story, which we thought was crazy, but
that boggles my mind. That's
yeah, you'd think like in a workshop with like people, Scott Snyder's like very well known for horror. You'd think there'd be a lot more people clamoring to tell a Halloween story, but no, we only got one submission for Halloween.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, is anybody going for President's Day or something? I think Halloween is the most fruitful holiday you could pick, but
I'm kind of scared about that Passover holiday because Passover is just enough holiday as it is. But as I did, I did a Hanukkah story for Holiday Spirits Volume 3 with Travis Gibbs imprint last year, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, you did the latkes, right? I remember that.
Yeah, the don't mess with Bubby. She may be sweet, but she's got a frying pan full of, hot oil.
Yeah.
Don't mess with Bubby.
Yeah, I was going to say about the thematic thing is I think that what you mentioned about kind of giving a little bit of a directive to the writers saying like include something you learned from this class is I think that's actually really cool. And I think in addition to being these stories all look really entertaining, I think as people are also aspiring creators and writers, that's one of those things that when you look at and you say, okay, I really see that they're trying to do something that maybe they wouldn't have done structurally otherwise.
Right.
Would be kind of a fun thing to look through as a reader, I would think.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what we like about it is that it's broad, but it does give you like something to focus on as a creator. But it's broad enough that if you pick up an issue of this, there really is kind of at least one story, if not a few stories, that'll appeal to just about anyone, any of your sensibilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I like about so many of the anthologies I see is, I mean, I'm a writer artist, but the artist is capitalized for sure. And, the cool thing about the anthologies is you see tons of different art styles. And generally there's 2 or 3 different ones that I'm like, that is really cool. And, jumps off the page at me.
Right.
So I love that. And then you also kind of have like, I look at Pineapple Macho and the images are a little small, but this has like such a cool action vibe, a lot of foreshortening, a lot of intensity. And then, other things like Kiss of the Sea looks a little bit more constant. It's painted, kind of has some of Kent Williams from the 80s feel, and looks like a little quieter. And it's nice to see that there's, so much variety in these things when normally you get stuff that's kind of all over the place. As far as kind of how you mentioned how you put these teams together and how you kind of approach creating the book. What kind of things do you guys do to market it? Aside, you kind of have a cool approach to your Kickstarter page. I'm sure everybody involved posts about these a lot. Has there been any like pros or cons to kind of having a big group of people to promote for each volume? And do you have a lot of people that come back time after time, or is it kind of started from square one each time?
Well, I think Kickstarter has all those great analytics now where you can kind of see what kind of people are supporting it. And so I think like most of these campaigns, I think you guys have probably all had this experience when you look at it, is that it's a lot of super backers, a lot of people who back. They're on Kickstarter specifically looking for stuff like this. And so as long as you have something on there that is not something you can easily get in stores, I think you do well, and super backers will carry you over the finish line. I think there is definitely like an outsized number of people who are in Scott's class that just buy all these, so people in the class who want to support the project so that, in a few more months when they have their story ready to pitch, the project is still going and they have somewhere to publish. So, you know, if you know that you can pick up a couple of good stories from your classmates and support the cause, you know, 6 months later, that project is still there and you can publish your own book in it. And that's, you know, that's kind of a great incentive for anyone to anyone in the group to support it. You know, it's like you get to have one of your first comics ever, if you want to get into this, like publish in a book with Scott Snyder's name on the cover. That's kind of a cool little feather in your cap to start your career. So, you know, you get a lot of that. And then I had done, I started all my comic book career stuff with a company called Blue Juice Comics, and they've been around for about 10 years now. They've done a few stories, a few series called The Accelerators and something called Anne Bonny that were both pretty popular, and they were in stores for years. And so they have a pretty big following of people, you know, from their social media and all that stuff. So when I started my Thorny Comics, it kind of began as an offshoot of that. And I still work with those guys a lot. We're actually in the middle of a new volume of Anne Bonny that'll be on Kickstarter in a few months, I hope. And but so I had a little bit of a head start in that, you know, they had a mailing list with some people who like to buy comics, and so that's where we did a Kickstarter with for them with a project called Billy the Kit, which is written by Justin Gray and drawn by Barry McLean, which had already been on Kickstarter, so it had a Kickstarter presence. And then from there, I did two of my own projects. I did something called Cicada Samurai. I did another book called Reign of Dracula that I was the editor on, but not the, I was the publisher, but not the writer or artist. Cicada Samurai, I wrote myself. So I had kind of a head start, and then you basically, you know, you just try to keep on putting things out there that people will like and they'll come back to. So I have a pretty decent number of people come back for, you know, the next campaign. And in this case, I think, you know, we'll get a lot of, I would say like a little more than half of my backers on the Cloakroom volume issue 2 were backers on the Cloakroom issue 1, you know, so you get repeat, which is great because it means people read the first 7 stories and said, this is great, I want more. And so they're back, you know?
Yeah, I think that sounds like it feeds in a way to everyone's benefit. You've got kind of all these parallel communities. You've got the Scott Snyder class community, you've got the publisher community, you've got the following you've built up. And it sounds like you guys have that working in a way that you're all feeding into each other in a way that brings people who like the work to everybody's stuff, which is cool. And I think that's something maybe that doesn't get talked about a lot, is people kind of finding ways to not just like shout out other things, but really combine audiences in an organic way and work together on cool stuff in a way that'll just bring more people to the table, which is, I think, pretty smart approach.
Thanks.
One thing I was going to ask, and that's something I usually ask everybody, is when you're pricing out your tiers and your digital, physical, stuff like that, what goes into that decision? Do you try to get digital as low as you can? Do you want to make sure that it's kind of, do you kind of view that as, you want to push people towards the physical stuff more than the digital, or like what kind of goes into that? And do you work with the team to determine it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the digital, I just compared it to other campaigns. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people will sell just their digital, version on like a 22-page, 24-page story, and it's like $5, $6, something like that. They'll do a deluxe, kind of the only thing we have is the deluxe. We don't really, we have like the big thing. So it's a 72-page story. So I just, we went up a couple of bucks. But that's it. I just try to compare that. With that, we compared the digital cost to what other people were doing, because it is kind of like a bonus. You'll get a lot of international people who aren't going to pay for shipping. Pay like $30-something to ship a book to Australia. So we wanted something there that could like let people into the story, into the stories. So for that, it was just comparing it to other campaigns. For the physical, we just looked at how much it would cost us to, kind of recoup our costs. So one thing about this whole project is Veronica and I don't keep any of the money. We front all the money for any art that we're paying for, all the cover artists, the design work on the redo of the logo, all the rebranding and all that stuff that we did. And then, we pay for the printing, we pay for all that stuff, getting it shipped to me so that we can ship it to all the backers. We pay for all that up front, and then we try to recoup that money. Once we've recouped the money that we've spent, all of the profits go to the creators. So we don't keep a dime of the money ourselves. We don't pay ourselves an editing fee, like nothing. So we just basically did the calculation and again compared it to other books. So, a lot of people will do $15 or $20 for a single issue, 20 to 26 pages, something like that. We're doing 70 pages of comics here. We wanted to keep it reasonable for people, but we just wanted to make sure we were, chipping away at that big number of what we spent. So we landed on $15 for any of the issues.
Yeah, cool. And I mean, that's a lot for you guys to take on, for these creators to, have a platform to be published with, to fulfill that, to pay for all the printing, and just even to coordinate all the printing, and I assume do the pre-press and stuff like that, is a lot. So that's it sounds like a really great opportunity for creators to get their feet wet with creating a comic and kind of being part of a team that puts something like this together.
Yeah, and it's been very cool. And honestly, what Veronica and I get out of it again is like we get to exercise that editor part of our brain. Kind of helping someone who's a writer put together the best version of the story that they have in their head without ever saying, well, here's how I would write it, which is like the first instinct as a writer. It's to just be like, here's what you should do. What about this? You kind of have to, if they ask for that, you offer, but you have to kind of tone that down and kind of ask questions and, kind of poke at soft spots until you work together and kind of make it all work. So we get that. And then the added benefit for me is, I have my own projects online. Like I said, I did a book called Cicada Samurai. That was a 10-page short. The first full issue of that, it's going to be on Kickstarter in the fall. The pre-launch page is already up. And I've got 100 and something, I've got 125 people following that. I haven't really started putting it out there yet, like pumping it. But that's a cool one. And so I get to kind of connect with all these different communities, like you said, all these parallel communities of comic book lovers who are into this stuff. And then when I have my own stuff to put out there, I have a large network of people who are at least willing to give it a serious look. And that's
what. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's it. That's what it's all about. It's all just networking and making friends and scratching backs, and hopefully people will scratch my own energy.
Yeah, no. What I was going to say is that it seems like you've kind of created a pipeline that does that to everyone's benefit, which is great to see. I mean, that's what I think we have a lot of going on in the indie comics community, and it seems like this is a real good sort of, I guess, pattern or ecosphere to do that in. And I think we did talk. We tried to get you on last year to talk about Cicada Samurai Zero, which I thought looked awesome. I love. I mean, anything that looks that. Share this tab so people can see it, but very cool stuff and very interesting. I love that kind of imagey 90s sort of thing, and it feels like that's a little bit of a Ninja Turtles, Bikers Mice from Mars type of vibe, which I thought was really cool.
Thank you.
And I'll try and find that other link to put for the pre-launch to put in the comments. But yeah, I really great looking book. I know you have to get out of here pretty soon, but like I said, the link is in the description, and hope everybody that's watching this will go over and check this one out because it's a great book. And it, like I said, this sounds like a really cool project that people should be pretty excited to support.
Man, I appreciate it, man.
Cool. All right. Well, Jerry, I know you have to get going, but thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for letting me skip the line, Dan. I appreciate it. My 3 kids appreciate it too.
No problem.
Take it easy, guys.
Thanks again. Take it easy. Cool. So, Dan, we'll jump over to Sherlock and then maybe talk about a few other things. You've got a lot going on. You've been at the convention, but let's just pop into Sherlock quickly here. Give us the 30-second pitch for the Phantom Masquerade.
Basically, Sherlock Holmes must test his wit against the Phantom of the Opera when the son of the Comte and Comtesse de Chagny, Christine and Raoul, goes missing. Can the two work together to save the boy? Because after all, obsession never dies.
So that little line brings up something I wanted to ask you. I'm going to jump ahead of my questions here a little bit. So these are obviously public domain characters.
Right.
And you have to pay really close attention to what you do and don't do with those, as far as what kind of visuals you harken back to, plot lines that maybe someone's brought in after the parts that are public domain. That line is actually, I think, is one of the Phantom of the Opera sort of taglines. If I'm
it's the
wrong.
Name of it's a joke on the sequel musical to the musical Phantom, which was Love Never Dies, and
Mhm.
I do not recommend that musical. I sat through it a few months ago on Broadway HD. Imagine taking all the characters from Phantom of the Opera and then making them totally unlikable.
Well, and I've told you this story before. I got dragged to a Phantom of the Opera when I was in college, and I kind of didn't want to see it. My parents had a theater phase. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh my god, all right, let's go. And it was cool as hell. I loved it. There were sword fights. The chandelier was awesome,
Mhm.
and yeah, but I don't remember. I don't have a really strong sense of the characters necessarily having a lot, aside from the Phantom, of course.
Yeah.
Having
The
like a really strong presence. So I can
Christian
see
and
when you. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Christian and Rao in the musical are a little undercooked
Mhm.
because also a little like in the musical, Little Phantom goes a long way, but Christine and Rao, they're ingenue characters. They're not as cooked as the Phantom. They're not as complex as the Phantom. But it's also a totally different version of what I'm doing, because I'm queuing closer to the original novel by Gaston Leroux. This acts more as a sequel to that original novel. There's certain, as you said, certain things apply because I can't use a mask like this, like the or whatever angle it is, facing it this way, right? Because
Mhm.
that's copyright of founder Lloyd Webber's really useful group. But I can do like a mask like this,
Mhm.
like we have in the preview images, which is the one you drew, because that's how often the Phantom is shown in public domain depictions, going
Mhm.
from like Lon Chaney to Claude Rains to mostly every version except the Andrew Lloyd Webber version.
Mhm.
We have a slight, it's basically there that one little panel of Christine and the Phantom in the flashback sequence, but
Mhm.
we've tried to make sure in every cover, every depiction, it's not.
Yeah. So I mean, that's something that's really important. I think because I'm my next project, which is going to be launching pretty soon now that my other campaign's over, um, is going to lean heavily into some public domain elements. And I've kind of had to do a lot of research into what specific things you can do and can't do. And it's really not always what you'd think. You can
Yeah,
get away with things, and I'm like, wow, you can do that. That's insane. And then there's other things that you're like looking at that you can't do, and it's like, well, that wouldn't have tripped any alarm bells for me,
yeah,
um, and I wouldn't have thought that would be a problem. So it's certainly worth doing a lot of research if you're looking to do something like this.
yeah.
One
Because
other thing. Oh, go
when it
ahead.
goes to Town of the Opera, the Gaston Leroux novel is public domain. The
Mhm.
1925 film with Lon Chaney is public domain because Universal never renewed the copyright back in the 70s. Almost every other depiction of Phantom of the Opera is under someone's copyright. So, for
Mhm.
example, the Claude Rains version is Universal's copyright. That's the version you'll see in all the Blu-ray collections of Universal Horror Monsters. Will be the Claude Rains 1947 depiction,
Mhm.
and like Hammer has their version. There's a version with Freddy Krueger, with the guy who played Freddy Krueger, basically doing Phantom of the Opera as Freddy Krueger. And they have a very different take on the mask, where it's like the flesh of his victim. It's weird.
Mhm.
And then there's the version with the rats, which we don't like to talk about.
Yeah.
There's a whole video by Lindsay Ellis talking about all the various adaptations of Phantom before and after the musical, and how some of them are just really out there, like Phantom of the Mall, Eric's Revenge.
Oh, well, yeah, those are. I think we're about to see a flood of those now that so many big characters are coming into public domain. One thing
Yeah.
you touched on about how they expanded those characters and made them unlikable is something I kind of really noticed as a trap people fall into whenever you take characters that fulfill a really specific function in a story that maybe
Mhm.
doesn't require them having a lot of agency or screen time or whatever. They're kind of pawns in a story sense. When you bring them back into their own story, you have to fill that in with details and agency and thoughts, objectives, and it doesn't always work with what people imagined about them from the other version. I mean, I think the best example is like I hate the Grant Morrison jerk Batman that's kind of developed, and I don't think that's all Grant Morrison's fault. It's kind of where people ran with it
Yeah.
after that became like the thing. But I hate that version of Batman that's like such a jerk, and he's like just really
Yeah,
not
to like
functional. But it works in a Justice League setting because he's got to bounce off all these other people, and he's kind of got to provide conflict as well. So like there are things that work in some stories and just totally don't work in other stories.
Yeah, that's why I like the Batman the Animated Series version, like the DC version, because it's more of that balance.
Yeah.
Some days, some books they'll lean back towards that balance, and other books they'll go completely the other way.
Yeah, and that's I think something that when you mentioned, I've never seen Love Never Dies or whatever the sequel's called, but I can very much imagine based on what I saw the first one.
In fact,
some of those characters had trouble.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to name the son in this originally. I was going to name him Gustav after Christine's father. And I checked Love Never Dies as wiki to make sure I wasn't treading on anyone's toes. And lo and behold, guess what he's called in that show? So we went with Philippe, which is the name of Raoul's brother who gets killed by the Phantom in the original novel, as an homage. But his full name is Philippe Gustave de Chagny, so therefore, best of both worlds.
Yeah, no, it's fun to play off of little things you can put in that are not necessarily story elements in versions that have come later, but can harken back to creators, can harken back to characters that were in the versions you can use in a way that kind of, I think, throwing things like that in that demonstrate your love for the source material and the versions you're playing upon really like give you a little bit of the fan service that you'd get from being able to use some of the more established elements that have come in stories that are not public domain. It's kind of a good substitute.
Yeah, and it's really hard because I have to pick and choose what works and what doesn't in this, because this is that, as I said, it's more of a sequel to the original Gaston Leroux novel, as well as like it's kind of a sequel to The Adventure of the Empty House, The Final Problem, the Moriarty stories, basically, of Sherlock Holmes. And there's also another public domain character, which I don't want to reveal yet, that's somewhat involved in the plot. You know who it is because you've read the script, but I'm not saying who it is publicly yet. But it's like I can't. It's like as much of my life you have to use the character of the Persian, who's a major character in the Phantom novel, and who's often cut from basically all mass media versions of the Phantom, except for kind of in the 1925 film where they replaced him with the character of Ledoux, who's a member of the Sûreté. But originally, when they filmed it, it was the Persian, and then they rechanged it when they were doing the reshoots. It's a stupid long story, but it's a character that's often cut from adaptations. And I had to make the sad decision of I can't bring him into the sequel because his story is basically done for very important plot reasons I won't divulge here. So I can't bring in the character of the Persian. I can reference him. I reference him in issue 2, which you will see eventually, but I can't bring him in as a character, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's such a delicate tap dance here. So we're coming up in half an hour, so I need to play a quick ad for one of our sponsors, but I have some questions about that we'll get back to in about 30 seconds.
Click that mouse and warp into All Ages of Geek's website, your ultimate portal to everything geek culture. Here you'll find articles that speak your language, from the latest anime buzz to the coolest tech trends. Our mission? To celebrate geekdom in all its glory. Whether you're a gamer, a comic enthusiast, a 90s kid, or an anime aficionado, we've got something for you. Dive deep into them with All Ages of Geek.
I love the animation in that commercial. They did such an awesome job.
It's fun.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was, hold on, what was I going to say? I'm going to backtrack in my brain.
For everybody watching, Daniel's had a long weekend of tabling a con, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, so the Persian has to, unfortunately, gets cut, and also it's because a lot of I also had to be careful what I trade because, as I said, this is more of a sequel to the original novel, whereas most Sherlock Holmes fan pastiches, which I've read basically one. I'm in the middle of one. It's by Nicholas Myers, the guy who may remember.
Oh, I know Nicholas Myers.
Yeah, for those watching, he's the one who wrote
the good. Well, not my favorite Star Trek movie, but my second and third favorite Star Trek movies.
Right. He started a whole bunch of pastiches at one point called Sherlock Holmes, starting with the 7% Solution, which is also an amazing film, with a song by Stephen Sondheim, which called the Madam Song. I won't go into that later, but it's one of the most risque songs I think I ever heard that guy ever write. But he also wrote a Phantom Holmes pastiche, and that is supposed to be where during Holmes's long hiatus after the Moriarty incident. But most of these Holmes Phantom pastiches in general is just taking Sherlock Holmes, dropping into Phantom of the Opera. Take Sherlock Holmes, drop into Phantom of the Opera. So I had to do something different. I made a sequel story.
Yeah, I think that works. I mean, I can certainly understand the temptation because Sherlock Holmes is one of those characters that works, and this kind of dovetails on what I was saying earlier about some characters kind of functioning very differently in different types of stories. He works as almost a Javert type character, if you want to use him for that, because everybody knows his kind of quote unquote power set. He's really smart. He's not going to miss anything. You can drop him there, and he will serve that function with very little, real estate in terms of your pages.
Yeah.
Whereas, obviously, if you're a fan of the novels and the character, about, and obviously all the TV shows that have kind of played on this lately, that he's got kind of a drug addiction. He's fought these really tough enemies, and there's some baggage with that. He's got complicated relationships with his allies, and he kind of works in a lot of ways like Batman in a lot of different contexts. You can really get into the depth of it. And I think that the important thing for anybody kind of using characters like that is a little bit what I was saying about Batman earlier. I can really hate when they kind of take the JLA Batman, which works very well from a story sense in those contexts, and bring that into a solo adventures, because it's just like, boy, this is out of tune. It doesn't work. You kind of have to know what parts of the character to use in what, the scope of your story. And it sounds like you put a lot of thought into how to do that with this story.
Yeah, we actually do touch on his drug addiction in this and you've seen the pages have come in from Warnia, who's our colorist. Jeremiah Shakes is our wonderful artist. Warnia Dewa is our colorist, and Ringo nominated, I think maybe Ringo winner. Justin Birch is our letterer. I have to double check if he won or is just still nominated. I have to double check. He's still addicted because he hasn't had many cases since his return, so he's back to the 7% solution of cocaine, unfortunately, in this story.
Yeah, I mean, that's
There's some major effects.
It's weird, and I guess I keep likening Sherlock Holmes to Batman, which I guess isn't a huge stretch. But I remember reading the letters column when the Venom arc came out in Legends of the Dark Knight. People really liked the story. They didn't they kind of would say to Denny O'Neil in the letters columns, like, I don't like that I'm glad this isn't like the real quote unquote Batman. And he would answer like, no, this is the real Batman. They really had a problem with that, the addiction aspect, the depths he kind of sunk to there in a lot of ways. It's weird, our ideas of canon, especially when you're introducing new elements. I think with Sherlock Holmes, everybody that's currently a Sherlock Holmes fan knows about those things and sort of has that in their head. It's tough to go to those depths and really flesh out those characters sometimes in that way.
Really difficult. Like originally I was going to do a story called The East End Rose, whereas Holmes would have to solve a murder. First, they think it's repeated the Ripper murders, but it turns out to be someone doing anti-Semitic murder, and he's going to have to confront his own anti-Semitism while writing the case. And I put that on the shelf because this one was a much stronger story that I basically figured out as pastiche. Though some elements of this the older idea might work itself into some sequels, and not. But it's Holmes. You have to remember, as a character, can't be a cartoon. He has to be a human being, albeit one on paper and pen and ink. But so you have to balance that canonicity versus what we need for best of the story. And I think I found that balance, and also have to find that Arthur Conan Doyle clipped tone for Sherlock and Watson.
Yeah, that's I gotta tell you, as much as I like the character, I have so many friends who love the novels and in the serials, the ones with Basil Rathbone, and I've tried to get into them. I just do not like the way he writes. I'm ashamed to say it.
He's still floored.
Yeah, it's weird because there's a lot of different. I can appreciate a lot of things about what he does. And of course, I love the setting and the character. It for me, Hound of the Baskervilles, at least the one that's the first one I kind of came into and gave a shot. I was like,
but novels can be a bit much. It's the short stories that I think really sing. That's where most of the canon comes from too. So it's
yeah, and I think that's the style. I love the Basil Rathbone serials just because I'm a huge Basil Rathbone fan. But it's got the great black and white feel. I didn't mind that they modernized them because it was still, to my eyes as a modern viewer, old enough. to be like removed and different. And it had a good balance. I think the balance that comes when you have to take a character and put them in a different setting, you really have to concentrate. Hey, what's cool and what isn't? What's fun about this and what isn't? And I think that was something that if you're going to use this character as you're doing, you sort of have the benefit of seeing, like, I've seen a lot of different takes on this character. Some have been really cool, some haven't, some have been very popular, and some haven't. And you really get to sift out what works and what's valuable and cool and appealing in a way that's fun. And I want to tie that into this artwork we have on screen now, which is I wanted to comment on earlier. I really love these. This is probably my favorite images I've seen from the project. The fog, the pen work, the atmosphere is all just so cool, so evocative of the movies that you've seen these characters in. Still looks very modern, and just really puts you in another time and place. Really great stuff they did here, the artist and the colorist.
Yeah. And I think we also went for, like, because speaking of the Covent Garden, Opera House stuff there, like, one of the biggest fishes I think for our design for Holmes was the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes. And coincidentally, Jeremy Brett is in the movie version of My Fair Lady as the male ingenue, and that movie starts at Covent Garden Opera House. Coincidentally,
that's right.
That opening sequence where all the women in the flower dresses are walking down the grand staircase there, and that's where he shortly thereafter runs over Eliza Doolittle trying to get a carriage.
It's weird how much my limited knowledge of theater intersects with things we're talking about. In high school, because I have very little, in high school I had to paint a backdrop for My Fair Lady, or help out doing it, and take on some other like parts of it. But I've heard that. I've seen that one a million times now because we were.
My grandparents were first nighters at the original Broadway production because my grandfather worked in music publishing, and he knew the orchestrator, so he and my grandmother got tickets. And several years to the day that they went to that show, I was born. Coincidence? I think not.
No, I have a soft spot for that one because I spent so much. It was, I think, my last year of high school. No, it was second. I really was like, so I did track, cross country, and wrestling. I was okay at wrestling. I certainly wasn't going to like go anywhere with it or like do it in college. I wasn't good enough for that. And I kind of did track and cross country to stay in shape for wrestling because that's a constant struggle. And it was kind of nice to be like, I'd love to do more. Maybe I don't want to track this year because I could just help out with the play and paint stuff, and that would be better. And there were, a lot of other people from other schools there, so it was kind of fun. But yeah, that's one of the only plays that's a standard a musical that I know much about. And
so if you ever watched the Audrey Hepburn film version, it opens at Covent Garden because Eliza Doolittle works out at the Covent Garden Flower Market, which was right next to the Opera House in London. Yeah,
it's cool. I didn't know there was that they were that religious. I assume the play with the Pygmalion was probably very strict about the settings. I didn't know the movie. I know they
I've
played fast and loose with a lot of
Pygmalion by Shaw. It's very precise.
I love that. I mean, when I read comics set in New York City, I want them to be like right. I don't want them to. I don't want like to see a car going the wrong way on the wrong street. I really notice that stuff when the subway's the wrong color. I know you're familiar with this as well. Yeah, but that's what I think is really fun about settings. You want to get that stuff right just to bring your reader into it.
Which is why I crack up every time I read a Daredevil comic, and it's like, Hell's Kitchen's not that bad. It's literally Restaurant Row for the theater district now.
Yeah, that's kind of, I give them that one because, boy, there's no neighborhoods. Maybe, I mean, you certainly can run into trouble anywhere. You should be careful. But yeah, Hell's Kitchen is high rises that cost $750,000 to have a condo there. It's just not Daredevil's old neighborhood anymore.
Yeah,
and so it's pretty hard, I think, especially when you have a character like Daredevil who has to be in Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah,
that's just the way it is. And like, well, Hell's Kitchen is just not that dramatic.
It's funny because he's saying that they film in New York City. Daredevil, the TV series, films a lot of Hell's Kitchen at Manhattan and Brooklyn.
They do. And in fact, and this is another thing that drives me nuts, they'll get on the subway, they'll act like they're in Manhattan and it says like, Kew Gardens or something like that, which is a different place. And then and get off on the completely or they'll be in like the subway station it'll say one thing in the wall. They'll get outside, it'll say another thing on the railing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that would have been so easy to fix. And
Those
I'm
are
not a
funny,
huge
those
stickler
kids.
for it.
Which we
I'm sorry,
played
go
when
ahead.
I watched Gotham with my mom. That was also filmed in New York for the
Yeah, I
vast
know.
majority of the day.
They towed some of my friends' cars. Some of my softball buddies lived in Williamsburg, and they were behind in their shooting, so they needed to clear everybody out right away. They post-dated their notices that you have to move your car. So my friends got back from our game. Where's my car? Somebody stole it. Gotham stole it, and they had to go to New Jersey to get it the next day. It took them a whole weekend to resolve.
So there's a I think there's this moment. We were playing. Well, that's filmed in Brooklyn. That's filmed there in Manhattan. That's filmed there. And there's a point at one point. I think there's a scene in a museum where Bruce and another kid were running through the museum, being chased by I think Ra's al Ghul.
Mm-hmm.
This is like season 3. And my mom's like, I wonder where they filmed this. I'm like, Mom, it's the Brooklyn Museum. We've been through that ballroom literally 100,000 times in my lifetime. It's on the way to the Egyptian wing. We're having like canopic jars.
Yeah, that's a fun thing. And I think to bring this back to stuff that, ties into comics and stories, my favorite writer is Ian Fleming. I love the James Bond novels. And what I like about them is the way he describes the places that James Bond goes to. Mm-hmm. You can just almost feel the breeze hitting you. It really puts you there. And research does a lot of that. Being in that place does a lot of that. That doesn't mean that you have to be accurate in a way that's like the Simpsons comic book nerd not liking something because it's not accurate. That's right. A little silly. What's important about it is to just get that vibe across, really make you feel like you have a taste of being somewhere that's very different and going to a different world. That's why we like science fiction. That's why we like historical fiction. Yeah. And I think that type of research, which I feel like you've done here, makes that really strong.
It's like anytime I could need a reference, I just hyperlink it into the script to send to Jay.
Yeah. And I think that stuff goes a long way to not just checking boxes as far as accuracy, but really making you feel like these panels make you feel. You want the atmosphere. You want the feel of being someplace very different. And I think when your creative team has researched stuff like that and paid attention to it, as a reader, I think you can sit back and relax and feel like you're getting something that's well thought out.
Yeah, funny you mentioned that because I was talking to Jay about ideas for issues down the line, and I had to tell we have to get this specific building because the building it currently is now is a totally different building, and we need the earlier version. It's like if I tell Dodie on American Dreams I need the exterior of the Tombs prison of New York City, but it has to be this specific version of it from the 1900. Mm-hmm. I have to pull up all these photo references. Because it could be, look, I don't want it to look like the original Tombs, which looks like a Egyptian temple. That's why it's called the Tombs. Or the current modern monstrosity that's currently being torn down in Manhattan. Because we're building yet another version of the Tombs.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I checked in there once as a joke when we were walking underneath it. And all my family in Ohio was like, oh my God, did you get arrested? What happened? So I will not make that mistake again. But oh, go ahead. Sorry. I should
explain to people who are watching this who don't know what the Tombs are. The Tombs are basically the New York City jail.
Yeah.
That's not Rikers. It's the Manhattan House of Detention.
Yeah. If you find yourself there, you've done something wrong. Mm-hmm. But to jump over to normally your page is still in pre-launch, and like I've said before, the link is in the description, so you can go over and check that out and get on the list so when you'll know when this launches. We kind of usually go into Kickstarter details and pricing and stuff like that, but you're still in pre-launch. But I did want to ask you, I mentioned you were at a con this weekend. Mm-hmm. I know you do a lot of cons. And I've noticed a lot of indie creators talking about going to cons, tabling, figuring out the logistics, and really looking at this as a new way to build your audience. That's not just online. That's not just crowdfunding. Tell us a little bit about, like, as a creator that goes to a lot of these, what kind of conventions do you think are good to go to for an indie creator like yourself that you see a lot of return on as far as selling things and making your money back for the table and travel, and also for meeting new people that you wouldn't necessarily get on Kickstarter and building your audience?
I would say always research the con first. If it's more comics focused, go there. So Terrificon, which is the one I was at, is very good. Baltimore, which I'm going to next month, is good. Well, in the past, I did Garden State Comic Fest once. I only had 2 issues of American Dreams at the time. That was a good show, I think, in general for connecting. Again, if it's more comics focused, you're more likely to be you're more likely to make better connections, better sales because there's more of a crowd looking for comics. Versus, say, a lot of these cons where it's basically a lot of tchotchkes in comics are an afterthought.
Mhm.
I'm going to suggest Jeremiah's cover with Warnia's colors. That's our cover A for.
Yeah, love this. I love the colors
Yeah.
on this one.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as conventions go, I mean, and there's also the aspect that you're networking with other creators, and I would think probably people that are on Big Two books and things like that. Is that something that factors in your decision to travel to cons, and like what kind of networking do you try to do there?
It does. Well, I can't always do that much networking because I'm taking a table, but I'll usually go early in the morning to do setup, and while I'm waiting for the con to begin, and normally it begins 30 minutes before posted start time in some places because there's always VIPs.
Mhm.
People got those extra packages. I'll go around, give my cards out, talk to fellow creators who are indie or even pros. I have I want to talk to and just meet for the first time or for a repeat time. Because I just hand my business card, and I also handed them flyers for this Kickstarter actually, and sorry, and it just helps to talk to people and whatnot. Now once the show gets going, it's a little harder because you can't get away from your table. And I was tabling by myself. Thankfully, the people next to me were at my table when I needed to go to the bathroom, grab a bite to eat, or just to stretch my legs. Because after a while of sitting, standing like you're in shul, it gets a lot. So you need to stretch your legs. Like I wanted to say just hi to Scott Snyder, and because he knows me from a lot of conventions and signings that I've been to where he's been. And literally, the only time I caught him was today at lunch where he was eating. I was like, "Hi, Scott. Hi, Dan. Bye, Scott." That was it.
Yeah, it's important. I think I've seen this a million times, even going back to reading about it in Wizard magazine in the '90s, like editors and creators saying like, "We're here to meet you at cons, but like, please don't bother us when we're trying to do something we need to do," which is be that talking to other people or trying to get a bite to eat, just basic stuff. I think there's definitely a lot to be gained from going to these cons, and I'm kind of dipping my toes into that water. What advice would you give to somebody, because you've been in a lot of big cons and small cons, if somebody's just starting out like I'm going to be soon, as far as tabling and things like this? Do you think it's best to start small? Do you think it's best to get a group of people together and get a table at a bigger place? What would your advice be to someone starting out there?
It's always complicated. Because do you want to start small and cheap a table, potentially make your investment back, but potentially have to deal with a lot of tchotchke salesmen versus comics people? Or do you want to start big and potentially jump the deep end? My first con was Baltimore 2018, and I was splitting with Cat Calamia. I only had one issue of American Dreams at the time. I somehow lucked out of selling all 50 copies I brought with me. I have never had enough, and it's been hard to make that number of sales since. But I also had like a big poster to go along with it as a bonus. But if you do a bigger con, I would recommend, and that's your cover. I would recommend your cover.
Yeah,
I recommend splitting a table or getting a bigger group, getting like 2 tables, because I might do that with the Bags Brothers next year for Terrificon.
Yeah,
I would say tabling solo, even if I can have my parents come by every once in a while to watch. I do like the bathroom food break. It's hard. Always have at least an assistant or a friend help you, or team up with other people and get like 1 or 2 get 2 tables and put that together. Because I'm always learning from these shows. I'm always learning. I'm always adjusting. Like at Baltimore last year, I had my one rack at the time, face in the middle, face front, like a big wall. Then someone advised me, do it at an angle on the side. I did that at the at Juice, which is a Jewish focused Comic Con in New York, and that helped sales. And I think also I had 2 racks at this show. One held the single issues, one held the books, and that might have just been maybe too much overload. But we'll see at Baltimore. And also, it's a size of a table. I had a 6-foot table, but it was also narrower than I thought it would be, so everything looked more crowded.
Mhm.
There's always several X factors that can get you good sales or throw your game off completely.
Yeah, I mean that's I think something you certainly can learn by going to con after con, but you also can learn by listening to creators like yourself who have done it and learn the ins and outs of this stuff, because that's I think it's such a prohibitive risk if you're going to a big con and you're starting out to be like,
Yeah.
travel, I've got to figure out a way to get all this stuff here, I gotta get help, and that can be kind of daunting. So I think it's important, and that's one of the reasons I'm asking you,
Yeah.
is because there's a lot of things that can kind of go wrong or just get out of control that you wouldn't have foreseen.
I would say the
And
next thing is like there's so many X factors could drive you out of control. It could be macroeconomic, like currency of the economy. It could be something similar to literally the position of your table, like I think mine was this year. It could be literally the position of the artist's alley in relation to everything else.
Yeah.
Like
I've seen a
Nickel
lot of people say that.
Nickel City, artist alley was all the way in the back, and there was celebrities around the perimeter, and all these sales in the middle before you even got to artist alley.
Mhm.
So that, and also you have to look at what show it is. If it's more of a celeb heavy focused show, chances are your sales might not be as hot.
Yeah, and I think that's important to look into, and that's again something where you got to reach out to other creators or just do your own research and figure out, hey, is this going to be friendly to creators like myself? Is this going to do what I need it to do?
There is
it's
a
such
website.
huge time and cost investment.
Yeah, there is a website called Artist Alley Confidential, which again, it's completely subjective, but it's based off people's subjective opinions of their experiences. So that's a good measure to update to go by. But
like
keep in mind, it might not be up to date.
Well, that's I think still just even having that, and not to take away. I mean, I know from talking to some of the people. I was at a cryptid con 2 weeks ago, tabling with my wife who does artwork of a cryptid called the Squonk and some other ones. So we're at something called Squonkapalooza in Pennsylvania. But we talked with the people that put on the show, and that is no mean feat. That's really difficult to manage all those moving parts. So I know that putting on these shows is difficult, and you're not going to do everything perfect, but you certainly can't tell the difference between a place that's set up to sell Deadpool keychains and get celebrity autographs versus places that want to be friendly to comic creators and even more so to indie creators like ourselves.
Yeah, and Terrificon usually is really good for comic creators. There are celebrities too, but the focus is mainly the comics. Mm-hmm. You can see that throughout throughout the show. But it's not without hiccups. There was Jim Lee was here on Saturday, and apparently the car service that was supposed to pick him up from the airport canceled it, so he ended up being like hours late, and it became a whole. But again, it was out of control of him and the organizers, apparently. So.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that stuff does certainly happen. But Dan, this has been really great to talk about. I love talking about Sherlock Holmes and these types of characters and what you do with them, kind of looking at legends of these characters from different angles and figuring out what works in a new comic. And I think this is also just great stuff to learn about what it's like to go to indie conventions or cons as an indie creator and get what you need out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, I'm going to jump over to a few other campaigns we want to highlight. Mm-hmm. The first one is called Remember Part 1. It's a 22-page full-color comic. It involves detectives Hallie and Amy unraveling a family's dark history as they uncover a string of mysterious deaths. I actually have seen a few pages of this behind the scenes, and it is some really cool stuff. It is taking a little bit of time to load. Some great covers, really cool book. And I think this guy is actually tabling at something pretty soon, or has, but a very interesting book Great artwork, which I always love to see. So definitely head over and check this one out. The next one I want to bring up is our book that Joey mainly edits and puts together called Archetypes. It's a bit of a love letter to Wizard Magazine and a bit of a anthology of indie comics. So we've got some great tips and articles about how to put together your comics, some writing process stuff, some sort of logistical, how do I get my comic book out there stuff, as well as some cool short stories from great indie creators. So get them the pre-launch for that one. It's going to be Halloween themed and is going to be a lot of fun. The next one I want to highlight is Danger Squad, which is a 100-page spooky mystery adventure. This one has a lot of great Stranger Things vibes. The artwork is fantastic. There's a ton of lore that this creator has put together that I've seen a little bit of, and the backstory, even at this point in pre-launch, is really expansive. You can check out some podcasts that are out there from some of the characters. This is a really fun world, so you definitely want to get onto these pre-launch list and check this out. The last one, do this real quick, so we can bring it up, is When We Transform, which is a superhero tale transition. This is another one like the others I've seen a bunch of the pages for and heard the creator talk a little bit about the story. It's a really interesting take on some time travel, on the trans experience, in ways that mesh together really intelligently, in addition to looking very cool. So I certainly recommend everyone check this one out as well. Last, but hopefully not least, is my book, which is a pre-launch, Cobalt Crisis. This is essentially a love letter to Crisis on Infinite Earths, or Secret Wars, but it's created as if it had taken place or been created in the 1940s when you had all that great pulp adventure, early Batman, early Superman type vibes going on. So I think it's a really good mix of things that are interesting that people like, and it's a really fun story that I'm excited to get out on Kickstarter. So this one's going to be launching very soon. I think I have 4 pages to do before the initial book, and probably launch that one pretty soon. So I hope everyone watching this will check out the link in the description for all these books as well as mine, and get in those pre-launch lists or follow and support the active campaigns. Take this one off. There we go. I think that does it for tonight. Dan, thank you for coming on short notice and after a very exhausting weekend.
No problem. Glad to be on.
Awesome. So everybody who tuned in, I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you had as much fun watching as I did with talking with these great creators. I hope you'll head over and support their books, and I will see you all next week.